My guest is Teresa Marteau, and she is. Where are you this afternoon? Where are you?
I'm in Cambridge.
You're in Cambridge, okay? Because today I've had an exciting global tour started this morning in Australia. It's very nice to speak to you, and thank you for sparing the time. It's a very interesting chapter. Let's get into the detail of it in a moment. But just tell me, from your point of view, what was the aim, what was the ambition for you with this chapter?
It was to highlight where much could be gained in preventing ill health by changing just 4 sets of behaviours. And while we recognise that this was no easy feat, nonetheless, it's an area where more focus, more attention could be applied in order to reach the ambition that the CMO set out in her report.
Yes, it is ambitious. And what were the 4 headings?
So the 4 sets of behaviours that contribute most to preventable premature death and disability worldwide and in the UK are those relating to smoking, excess consumption of alcohol, unhealthy diets, and physical inactivity. So if you change those 4 sets of behaviours, thinking about that with UK data, UK or English, I'm not sure. Anyway, you could prevent around 80% of new cases of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and 40% of new cases of cancer. So it's huge what you could do if you had an effective set of interventions and policies. So what we wanted to do, first of all, was to identify, those areas have been identified before, but really to highlight those 4 key sets of behaviours, describe more about their patterning, because they also contribute much to inequalities in healthy and life expectancy.
What I really liked about your chapter in box 8.1, right at the beginning, you describe someone waking up, checking your phones, grabbing a snack on the way to office, snacks in the office, all the wrong things for lunch, come home, open a bottle of wine, collapse on the sofa, and then you say you set the alarm and at 6 o'clock and you get up and do it all again. I think you've been having a sneak peek into my life, because that's what I do, and it's such an astute observation of all of us, isn't it? Really.
That is the key point. To paraphrase President, it's the environment, stupid.
Yes, that's right. What interests me when you talk about smoking, there's some very useful data on all of the aspects that you mentioned, but smoking is interesting because smoking is probably the only one where we've actually taken robust action. I mean, if you think about famous public health people, Thomas McEwen, for example, in 1960s, he wrote, governments have done everything they can with public health, clean water, adult literacy, childhood immunization. Now it's the extent to which governments are prepared to interfere in the lives of ordinary people. And of course, Tony Blair went on to interfere in the lives of ordinary people when he brought in the smoking at work legislation. And it's interesting, I think, to explore the extent where we have to make things happen for people to change their behavior rather than try and nudge and fudge and kind of whisper in their ear. I mean, it's the law, isn't it, that changes behavior? The law makes us safe, seatbelts in cars, crash helmets on motorbikes, health and safety legislation. Do we have to be more heavy-handed with legislation?
Okay, well, there's a lot in what you've said. First of all, that framing of interfering in the lives of ordinary people, we could deconstruct what we mean by that, because there's already a deal of interference in our lives, hence the environments that we described in box 8.1 that you've already described. So I would make a distinction between what is the intervention and what is the means of implementation. Okay, so it may be that we're keen on, well, the evidence would suggest that reducing exposure of young people to alcohol marketing and advertising reduces the age at which they first start drinking and how much they consume.
Is that a voluntary code or is that the law?
Well, that's absolutely right. So I'm saying I'm still making that distinction between what's the intervention and then how do you achieve it? What's the implementation? And I agree that there needs to be more regulation in order to implement many of these policies. And we had, as you'll recall, a period of time when we had the responsibility deal in the coalition government. Yeah. And there was that optimism. Some people at the time identified that it was an optimism born of hope rather than experience, that somehow bringing the industries around the table would result in them making these changes in a voluntary way. Well, that has been evaluated and found in the main not to be an effective way of changing environments in order to change behaviour.
And then we move into the reticence of politicians to take the next step, don't we? Because if you look at what's happened with the sugar tax, I guess the jury's still out, because it'll be a more longitudinal game to see how that works. But fundamentally, I think my first reaction would be, perhaps I'm wrong, is in inverted commas, it's actually not worked in the way that we hoped it might have done, and there's still more to do.
I think that the preliminary evidence is looking promising.
Is it?
Yes, and there was a report published in the last couple of days from a task force that was co-chaired by Michael Bloomberg and Larry Summers. Yeah. Called Health Taxes to Save Lives. And they identify in this report, they bring together much of the evidence internationally on fiscal policies, fiscal and economic policies, and just say they are completely underused internationally for changing behaviour, and in particular reducing consumption of tobacco, alcohol and sugary drinks.
Yes, and in the report you actually do talk about fiscal policies, don't you, and putting up taxes.
Those are the interventions for which there is which there is strongest evidence for largest effects at population level and for being able to reduce the gap in healthy life expectancy between the rich and the poor, because they have more effect on the poorest, who tend to be those who are consuming most of these products. Yes. And contributing mainly to the gap in life expectancy between the rich and the poor. I mean, I think a relevant question is at what point one sets the duty or the tax, because I think it's about intensity of the intervention. So some have argued that the sugar tax, well, indeed, in the report I've just mentioned, they argue that these taxes need to be at a much higher level and increase year on year, which is what they haven't been doing.
I mean, is that the way forward, do you think? Or do we just say to the industries, don't use sugar, find something else?
Yeah, there is no one effective intervention. You need a raft of interventions, and one needs to think about this within a systems perspective, so that it's, making one change will perturb certain other parts of the system. Yeah. So we tried already to say to industry, don't do this, but industry, I'm using that term in a blanket way, and of course there are many industries, and not all of whom profit or stand to lose profit from effective policies. But we do know, and there's some very good scholarly work, and we mention it in our chapter, that industry lobbies government and frames the discourse in the public such that it enables people to think that somehow taxation is a violation of an individual right to purchase products that will reduce their life expectancy.
Yes. This is a really fascinating chapter, and it's really at the heart, isn't it, of what Dame Sally is trying to do. Are you optimistic for the future?
I have a conditional optimism. I am optimistic in that I wouldn't spend my time writing chapters like this, and I did prioritize my time to do it, and I don't regret that, because I do think that global leaders such as Dame Sally see this as an opportunity to bring the evidence not only to the policymakers, but I think the key actors here are the public, or the many publics. And one of the reasons for what has been described as policy inertia is not just the reluctance of policymakers to act, particularly on some of these difficult interventions that have high political costs that we've just talked about. It's the lack of demand or sort of critical public voice calling for brave policymaking. So I see that as a real opportunity for us to communicate more effectively, to set up forge partnerships between the policymakers, the academics, public and private sector, and civil society organisations. So I think we're all in this together, and I'm optimistic that if we do manage to pull off those effective partnerships, we really can take advantage of what I see as an opportunity.
And on that optimistic note, we shall leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and talking about this fascinatingly interesting chapter in the book. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And bye for now. Bye-bye.